A millionaire abandons his wife and wheelchair-bound son, saying, "You're a burden." He leaves them on an isolated farm in search of freedom and success. Years later, repentant and confronted with his own death, he decides to return. But what he finds on the farm is so much more than he expected that he bursts into tears at what he sees. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The gleaming marble floors of Harrison Enterprises headquarters reflected Alexander. Harrison's determined stride as he made his way to yet another board meeting. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished surface, each step a testament to the empire he had built from nothing. At 45, Alexander was the epitome of success. His salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his custom-made suit impeccably fitted, and his commanding presence turning heads wherever he went. But beneath that polished exterior, a storm was brewing. As he stepped into his private elevator, Alexander loosened his tie slightly, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability that no one else would witness. The weight of his latest acquisition deal pressed heavily on his shoulders, along with something else, something he couldn't quite shake off. The image of his son Thomas's wheelchair ramp being installed at their mansion flashed through his mind. He quickly pushed the thought away, just as he had been doing for months now. The constant adaptations to their home, the endless doctor appointments, the way his wife Catherine had transformed from a vibrant socialite into a full-time caregiver, it all felt like a steady erosion of the life he had imagined for himself. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, and Alexander straightened his tie, his mask of confidence firmly back in place. As he walked into the boardroom, a chorus of "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," greeted him. These were his people, ambitious, hungry for success, unencumbered by the complexities of a challenging home life. "The Jenkins merger is proceeding as planned," his CFO Michael Chen announced as the meeting began. "We're looking at a 30% increase in market share by the end of the quarter." Alexander nodded, but his mind wandered to the argument he'd had with Catherine that morning. She had begged him to attend Thomas's physical therapy session, but he had dismissed it as another obligation he couldn't afford. "The company needs me," he had said, avoiding her disappointed gaze. The meeting droned on, but Alexander found himself increasingly distracted. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see his reflection superimposed on the city skyline. A man who had everything and yet felt increasingly hollow. The empire he had built was thriving, but his home had become a prison of guilt and resentment. Later that evening, as his chauffeur drove him home, Alexander scrolled through his phone, pausing at a message from Catherine. "Thomas asked for you again during therapy. He made progress today. Wish you could have seen it." The mansion loomed ahead, its grandeur now feeling more like a facade than ever before. As he stepped inside, the silence was deafening. No excited greetings, no warm welcome, just the distant sound of wheels on hardwood floors and Catherine's soft voice guiding Thomas through his evening exercises. Alexander stood in the foyer, his briefcase heavy in his hand. The walls were lined with his achievements, awards, photographs with business leaders and politicians, magazine covers featuring his success story, but none of them could drown out the sound of his son's struggle or his wife's dedication, which now felt like an accusation against his own absence. He made his way to his study, passing the family room where Catherine was helping Thomas with his stretches. She didn't look up, and Thomas was too focused on his exercises to notice his father's presence. Alexander watched them for a moment, feeling like an outsider in his own home. Inside his study, he poured himself a glass of scotch and sank into his leather chair. The city lights twinkled beyond his window, a reminder of the empire he had built. But tonight, they seemed to mock him, highlighting the growing distance between his professional success and his personal failure. His phone buzzed with another message from his assistant. Reminder, board presentation tomorrow at 8 a.m. Tokyo investors attending. Alexander stared at the message, then at the family photo on his desk, taken years ago before Thomas's. Condition had manifested, before Catherine's smile had become strained, before success had started to feel like a curse rather than a blessing. He took another sip of scotch, letting the liquid burn down his throat. Something had to change. He couldn't continue living this double life, the successful businessman and the failing father. But as he sat there, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he couldn't see a way to bridge the growing chasm between his ambitions and his family's needs. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were turning. Golden and the air carried the first hint of winter. Alexander had just closed another major deal, one that would expand his empire across 3 continents. But instead of feeling triumphant, he felt suffocated by the weight of his domestic life. Catherine had left yet another note on his desk. Thomas's swimming therapy is today at 2 p.m. Please try to make it. He needs your support. The paper trembled in his hands as anger and frustration bubbled up inside him. Every request, every reminder of his family's needs felt like chains around his ankles, holding him back from reaching even greater heights. He found Catherine in the garden, tending to her roses, a hobby she had taken up as a way to find peace amid their challenging life. Thomas was nearby, practicing his upper body exercises in his wheelchair, his determination evident in every movement. "I can't do this anymore," Alexander announced, his voice cutting through the peaceful morning air. Catherine looked up, soil still on her gardening gloves, her eyes widening at his tone. "What are you talking about, Alexander?" she asked, standing slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "This," he gestured wildly at their surroundings. "This life, this constant pressure to be everywhere, to be everything to everyone. I built an empire, Catherine. I created something magnificent. But I come home, and all I feel is guilt and obligation." Thomas had stopped his exercises, watching the scene unfold with growing anxiety. Catherine moved to stand between them, as if to shield their son from the harsh words that were about to come. "We're your family, Alexander," she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "Not obligations, not burdens. Your family." But Alexander was too far gone, too consumed by his own frustrations to hear the warning in her tone. "A family should lift you up, not hold you back. Do you know what I could achieve if I didn't have to constantly worry about therapy sessions and doctor appointments? If I didn't have to modify every aspect of my life to accommodate—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Thomas's face had crumpled, and Catherine's eyes blazed with a fury he had never seen before. "To accommodate your son?" she finished for him, her voice trembling with rage. "Your own child, who fights every day to overcome challenges that you can't even imagine?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Alexander ran his hands through his hair, his perfect composure finally cracking. "I need space," he said finally. I can't keep living like this. The farmhouse in Vermont, you and Thomas should go there. It's peaceful, away from everything. It would be better for everyone." Catherine stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Better? For everyone? Or just better for you, Alexander?" "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he continued, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "The constant meetings, the deals, the responsibility of thousands of employees depending on my decisions. I need to focus, to be at my best. I can't do that here, not with your disabled son and your demanding wife dragging you down." Catherine's voice was ice cold. "Is that what you're trying to say?" Thomas wheeled himself forward, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. "Dad, please." But Alexander had reached his breaking point. In that moment, looking at his son's pleading face and his wife's fierce protective stance, he made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "The farmhouse is yours," he said, pulling out his checkbook. "I'll make sure you're both taken care of financially. But I need to be free of this. You're holding me back, both of you. You're a burden I can't carry anymore." The words hung in the air like poison. Catherine's face drained of color, but her spine straightened with dignity. Thomas's hands gripped his wheelchair's arms so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "Very well," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "If that's your decision, we'll go. But remember this moment, Alexander. Remember what you're throwing away." She turned to Thomas, her voice softening. "Come on, sweetheart, we need to pack." As they moved toward the house, Alexander stood rooted to the spot, already feeling the weight of his words, but too proud, too caught up in his own ambitions to take them back. He watched as his wife and son disappeared inside the mansion, leaving him alone in the garden with nothing but his success for company. The Vermont farmhouse stood silent against the backdrop of rolling hills, its weathered exterior stark contrast to the luxurious mansion Catherine and Thomas had left behind. 3 months had passed since Alexander's devastating decision, and autumn had given way to winter, bringing with it a blanket of snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine canvas. Catherine stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching as the first rays of sunlight painted the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold. The silence here was different from the hollow quiet of their former home. It was peaceful, alive with possibility rather than heavy with expectation. "Mom," Thomas's voice called from his room. "Could you help me with something?" She smiled, setting down her mug. These morning routines had become sacred to them both, a time to bond and grow stronger together. As she helped Thomas with his morning exercises, she noticed how his arms had grown stronger, how his determination had only increased since they moved to the farm. "I've been thinking," Thomas said as he completed his final stretch. "The barn out back. What if we converted part of it into a training space? I could set up some equipment, maybe even a small pool for therapy." Catherine paused, surprised by her son's initiative. "A pool? That's quite an undertaking, sweetheart." "I know," Thomas replied, his eyes shining with determination. "But I've been researching. There are grants available for adaptive sports facilities, and with the money Father sends..." He hesitated, then continued with renewed resolve. "We could make something really special here." Catherine sat on the edge of Thomas's bed, studying her son's face. At 15, he was showing a maturity that both impressed and saddened her. The hardships they'd faced had forced him to grow up faster than any child should have to. "Tell me more about your idea," she encouraged, and Thomas's face lit up as he pulled out a notebook filled with sketches and calculations. As Thomas explained his vision, Catherine's mind wandered to the stack of unopened letters from Alexander's lawyers sitting on her desk. Each envelope contained checks and formal updates about trust funds and financial arrangements, but never a personal word from the man himself. She had stopped expecting any. The day unfolded with a new sense of purpose. Catherine found herself exploring the old barn with fresh eyes, seeing beyond its current state of mild disrepair to its potential. The high ceilings could accommodate lift equipment, the spacious interior could house both exercise equipment and a therapy pool. Most importantly, it would be theirs, something they built together, not another modification to someone else's vision of a perfect home. Later that afternoon, as Catherine worked on converting one of the farm's spare rooms into a home office, she had started taking online courses in business management. Their nearest neighbor, Jack Turner, stopped by. A local contractor in his early 50s, Jack had been invaluable in helping them settle into farm life, teaching them about maintenance and offering assistance whenever they needed it. "Heard you're thinking about renovating the barn," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Catherine. "Thomas mentioned it when I drove by this morning. It's a good, solid structure, plenty of potential." Catherine nodded, spreading out Thomas's sketches on the kitchen table. "It's his idea. He wants to create a training facility, something that could help not just him, but maybe other kids in similar situations." Jack studied the plans, his experienced eye catching details that Catherine might have missed. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "my brother runs a construction company in Burlington. He specializes in accessible architecture. I could give him a call, get some professional input." The offer touched Catherine deeply. Since arriving at the EE farm, she had discovered a community so different from the competitive, superficial world of their previous life. Here, people offered help freely, without expectation of return or advantage. As she and Jack discussed possibilities for the barn renovation, Thomas wheeled himself into the kitchen, his laptop balanced on his knees. "Mom, look at this," he called excitedly. "I found a website about adaptive swimming programs. They're doing amazing things with hydrotherapy and strength training." Catherine watched as her son's eyes lit up while explaining the various programs and their benefits. The enthusiasm in his voice, the careful research he'd done, the way he was already thinking about helping others. It all struck her with the sudden realization that their forced exile to this farm might not have been a punishment after all, but an opportunity. That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, Catherine sat on the farmhouse's wraparound porch, wrapped in a warm blanket against the winter chill. The stars seemed brighter here, away from the city's glare, and the silence was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Alexander's contact information. There were so many things she wanted to tell him. About Thomas's progress, about his plans for the barn, about how their son was growing into an extraordinary young man. But she put the phone away without making the call. Some journeys, she was learning, were better taken alone. Meanwhile, in his penthouse office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Alexander Harrison was celebrating another successful quarter. The Jenkins merger had exceeded all expectations. Stock prices were soaring, and his empire was expanding faster than ever. Yet, as he stood at the window watching the city lights twinkle like stars, he felt nothing but a profound emptiness. "Excellent work today, Mr. Harrison," his assistant Sarah said, placing a stack of documents on his desk. "The board was very impressed with the quarterly results. Will you be attending the celebration dinner tonight?" Alexander nodded absently, his attention caught by a magazine on his desk. The cover featured a young Paralympic athlete in a wheelchair, smiling triumphantly after breaking a world record. For a moment, he saw Thomas's face superimposed on the athlete's, and his chest tightened uncomfortably. "Sarah," he called as she turned to leave. "What happened to the renovation plans for the Vermont farmhouse? The ones I asked for last month?" "I have them right here," she replied, pulling a folder from her stack. "The contractors submitted their proposals for the accessibility modifications you requested. Would you like me to schedule a meeting to review them?" Alexander took the folder but didn't open it. Instead, he dismissed Sarah with a wave of his hand and sank into his leather chair. The folder felt heavy in his hands, weighted with more than just paper and proposals. It represented his attempt to ease his conscience through money, as if better ramps and wider doorways could make up for his absence. The celebration dinner that evening was held at an exclusive restaurant with a view of Central Park. Alexander sat at the head of the table, surrounded by board members and executives, all raising their glasses to toast their collective success. The wine was expensive, the food exquisite, but everything tasted like ash in his mouth. "To Harrison Enterprises," Michael Chen announced, raising his glass, "and to Alexander, the man who never lets anything stand in the way of success." The idiot. Words meant as praise hit Alexander like a physical blow. He forced a smile and raised his glass, but the champagne turned sour on his tongue. Under the table, his hand clenched into a fist, his wedding ring, which he still wore out of habit, pressing painfully into his finger. Later that night, in his empty mansion, Alexander found himself in Thomas's old room. It remained exactly as it had been the day they left, like a museum exhibit of his failure as a father. The adaptive equipment, the specialized bed, the carefully arranged photographs, everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. He picked up a framed photograph from the bedside table. It showed Thomas at his last birthday party before the diagnosis, sitting on Alexander's shoulders, both of them laughing without a care in the world. The memory of that laughter echoed hollowly in the silent room. His phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. "Monthly transfer to Vermont account completed. Would you like me to increase the amount as discussed?" Alexander stared at the message, remembering Catherine's fierce independence, the way she had refused to beg or plead when he had made his decision. He had thought somehow that providing financially would be enough, that money could bridge the gap his absence had created. Now, surrounded by the remnants of his family life, he was beginning to understand how wrong he had been. He walked through the quiet house, past Catherine's abandoned garden, now overgrown and wild, past the empty kitchen where they used to share family meals, past the living room where Thomas had taken his first steps with his walker. Every room held memories that seemed to mock him, reminding him of everything he had sacrificed in pursuit of his ambitions. In his study, he pulled up the security footage from the Vermont farmhouse. another way he tried to maintain some connection to the family he had abandoned. The cameras showed the property covered in snow, peaceful and serene. A light was on in what he knew to be Thomas's room, and for a moment, Alexander found himself wondering what his son was doing. Was he studying, reading, planning for his future? The sea thought that Thomas might be building a life without him, growing and developing into his own person, filled Alexander with an unexpected mixture of pride and grief. He had chosen this. Separation had deemed it necessary for his success, but sitting alone in his massive house surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, he was beginning to question what success really meant. Spring arrived at the Vermont farm with a burst of new life. The barn renovation project was well underway, thanks to Jack Turner's connections and the community's support. Catherine watched from the farmhouse porch as workers installed the specialized pool equipment, her heart swelling with pride at how far they'd come in just 6 months. Thomas had thrown himself into the project with unprecedented enthusiasm. His physical therapy sessions had taken on new meaning as he worked towards specific swimming goals. The local high school had even started sending other students with physical challenges to train with him, turning the barn into an unofficial community center. "Mrs. Harrison," a warm voice called from the driveway. Dr. Emily Chen, a rehabilitation specialist from Burlington, walked towards the porch. She had been working with Thomas for the past 2 months, and her impact had been remarkable. "Please, call me Catherine," she replied, welcoming the doctor with a smile. "Thomas is already in the barn, probably going through his morning exercises." Dr. Chen's eyes sparkled with excitement. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. Have you heard of the Regional Adaptive Sports Championship?" Catherine shook her head, following the doctor into the house. Over coffee, Dr. Chen explained the competition, an event that brought together athletes with physical challenges from across New England. "Thomas has shown incredible progress," she continued. "With his dedication and the facilities you're building here, he could be ready to compete in 6 months." The idea took Catherine's breath away. She remembered Thomas as a child, watching swimming competitions on TV with longing in his eyes. Now here was an opportunity for him to not just participate, but compete. Later that afternoon, as she worked on her business coursework, she was nearly finished with her certificate in non-profit management. Catherine heard laughter from the barn. She looked out to see Thomas demonstrating arm exercises to a young girl in a wheelchair, her parents watching with grateful smiles. "The key is to focus on what you can do, not what you can't," Thomas was saying, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned this lesson the hard way. The scene stirred something in Catherine's heart. What had started as their private retreat was blossoming into something bigger, something that could help others. She opened her laptop and began researching the steps needed to establish a non-profit organization. Jack stopped by that evening, as he often did, bringing fresh vegetables from his garden and news from town. Over the past months, his friendly support had grown into something more, though neither of them had put it into words yet. "The pool installation will be finished by next week," he said, helping her prepare dinner. "And I heard about the competition. Thomas hasn't stopped talking about it." Catherine smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. "It's amazing to see him like this. He's found his purpose here." "You both have," Jack replied softly, his hand brushing against hers as he reached for the salt. The moment was interrupted by Thomas wheeling into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today. Sarah Martinez, you know, the girl who started coming last month, she managed to swim a full lap by herself." As Thomas shared the story of his student's success, Catherine noticed how his eyes shone with pride, not for himself but for someone else's achievement. He had inherited her capacity for care and compassion, traits that Alexander had never fully understood or valued. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Catherine sat in her office reviewing the day's events. The certificate on her wall caught her eye. She had completed her first business course with honors. Next to it hung a calendar marked with Thomas's training schedule and the growing list of community members who used their facilities. She pulled out her journal, a habit she had started since moving to the farm. "Today," she wrote, I realize that what began as an exile has become a mission. Alexander thought he was punishing us, pushing us away from his vision of success. Instead, he gave us the freedom to find our own. Outside, the spring peepers sang their evening chorus, a sound so different from the city sirens they used to hear. Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the barn where their dreams were taking shape. In the soft evening light, she could see the outline of the new sign they planned to install, Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, where limitations transform into possibilities. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were building something meaningful with the Harrison name, but in a way Alexander had never imagined. As she prepared for bed, Catherine thought about how life had a way of turning endings into beginnings, of transforming pain into purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving, and in doing so, helping others find their strength too. The first signs of trouble came during a routine board meeting at Harrison Enterprises. Alexander sat at the head of the conference table, half listening to quarterly projections when a sharp pain shot through his chest. He dismissed it as stress, just as he had been dismissing the headaches and fatigue for weeks. "Mr. Harrison?" Michael Chen's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right? You look pale." Alexander waved off the concern, but the room had already fallen silent, all eyes on him. "Continue with the presentation," he commanded, loosening his tie slightly. The meeting resumed, but he caught the worried glances his executives exchanged. Later, that afternoon in his private bathroom, Alexander stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him had changed. His face was drawn with dark circles under his eyes that even his expensive grooming routine couldn't hide. His hands trembled slightly as he splashed cold water on his face. "Sir?" Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Dr. Richards called again. He insists on seeing you about your test results." Alexander had been avoiding these calls for days. The preliminary tests had shown some concerning results, but he had convinced himself it was nothing serious. Success required focus, and he couldn't afford distractions. "Schedule it for next week," he replied, knowing he would probably cancel again. That evening, alone in his study, Alexander found himself looking at recent surveillance photos from the Vermont farm. The images showed significant changes to the property. Construction equipment around the barn, cars in the driveway, people coming and going. He zoomed in on one particular photo that showed Thomas working with a young girl in a wheelchair. The cage. Sight of his son, clearly in his element, teaching and helping others, stirred something in Alexander's chest that had nothing to do with his physical symptoms. He opened his laptop and began searching for information about adaptive sports and rehabilitation programs. What he found surprised him. There were articles about successful athletes with physical challenges, about therapeutic swimming programs, about communities built around adaptive sports. In one local news website, he found a small piece about a new facility being developed in Vermont, though it didn't mention names. His phone buzzed. Dr. Richards again. This time Alexander answered. "Mr. Harrison," the doctor's voice was grave, "we need to discuss your test results in person. The symptoms you're experiencing, they could indicate something serious." The word serious hung in the air like the suspended weight. Alexander thought about the empire he had built, the sacrifices he had made to create it. He thought about Thomas, teaching others despite his own challenges, and Catherine, who had taken their exile and turned it into something meaningful. "How serious?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Serious enough that we need to start treatment immediately," Dr. Richards replied. "The condition is treatable if we catch it early, but we need to act now." Alexander scheduled the appointment for the next morning, his hands shaking as he marked it in his calendar. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had abandoned his family because he saw them as limitations, as burdens that would hold him back from achieving more. Now his own body was betraying him, imposing limitations he couldn't control. That night, sleep eluded him. He wandered through his empty mansion, past the rooms that once echoed with family life. In Thomas's old room, he found one of his son's early therapy journals, forgotten in the hasty move to Vermont. The pages were filled with goals and progress, notes each small victory celebrated in a child's handwriting. One entry caught his eye. "Dad missed my session again today. Mum says he's busy building something important. I'm building something too. I'm building strength. Maybe one day he'll see that's important too." Alexander sank into the nearest chair, the journal clutched in his trembling hands. The empire he had prioritized over his family suddenly felt meaningless in the face of his health crisis. He had built his success on the belief that nothing should stand in the way of achievement, that limitations were meant to be overcome or discarded. But as he sat there, surrounded by the hollow echoes of his supposed success, Alexander began to understand that he had mistaken what was truly valuable. His son, who he had seen as limited, was helping others overcome their challenges. His wife, who he had dismissed as a burden, had built something meaningful from the very conditions he had imposed as punishment. The pain in his chest returned, sharper this time, a physical manifestation of the realization that was slowly dawning on him. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but they had built something far more valuable, a community, a purpose, a life of meaning. The diagnosis hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sitting in Dr. Richard's office, surrounded by medical degrees and certificates, he listened as words like treatment options and survival rates floated around him. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of seeing his family's challenges as limitations, he now faced his own mortality. "We need to start treatment immediately," Dr. Richards emphasized, sliding a folder of information across his desk. "With aggressive therapy, we have a good chance of managing the condition. But Mr. Harrison, you need to understand, this will require significant lifestyle changes." Alexander stared at the treatment schedule, his mind racing. Board meetings, international flights, lengthy negotiations. His carefully structured world would need to bend to accommodate this new reality. Just as his family had once needed him to bend, to adapt, to be present. "How long?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "That depends on how well you respond to treatment, but more importantly, it depends on whether you're willing to make the necessary changes. Your current lifestyle, the stress levels you maintain, they're not sustainable anymore." Back in his office, Alexander cancelled his meetings for the day and stood at his window, watching the city bustle below. The empire he had built now felt like a cage, its demands and pressures squeezing the life out of him. He thought of Thomas, who had faced his own challenges with a grace and courage that Alexander was only now beginning to understand. His assistant Sarah entered quietly, placing a stack of papers on his desk. "Sir, I've rescheduled your appointments as requested, but there's something else you should see." She hesitated before continuing. "I found this while organizing some files." She handed him a local newspaper from Vermont. The small article featured a photograph of the renovated barn at his old farmhouse, now transformed into what the paper called an innovative adaptive sports center. The image showed Thomas demonstrating swimming techniques to a small group of children in wheelchairs, his face alight with purpose and joy. "The center has become a beacon of hope for families in the region," Sarah read softly from the article. "Under the guidance of Catherine Harrison and her son Thomas, dozens of children with physical challenges have found new strength and confidence." Alexander sat heavily in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. All this time he had been building towers of steel and glass, measuring success in dollars and cents, while his family had been building something far more meaningful, a legacy of hope and transformation. That evening, instead of heading home to his empty mansion, Alexander found himself driving to the cemetery where his parents were buried. He hadn't visited in years, too busy with his empire to make time for such sentimental gestures. Standing before their graves, he remembered his father's words from long ago. "Success isn't about what you build, son. It's about what you leave behind." He had dismissed that wisdom in his youth, too eager to prove himself, to build something grand and impressive. Now facing his own mortality, he understood what his father had meant. Thomas and Catherine had taken their circumstances he had forced upon them, and created something that touched lives, that made a real difference. Back In his car, Alexander pulled out his phone and opened the secure feed from the farm's security cameras. The evening activities were winding down, but he could see lights still on in the barn. Through the windows, he caught glimpses of Thomas working late, reviewing what appeared to be training plans or schedules. The sight of his son, so dedicated to helping others, made Alexander's chest tighten with emotion. He thought of all the therapy sessions he had missed, all the milestones he had ignored in pursuit of his ambitions. Now, facing his own health crisis, he understood the true cost of his choices. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Richards. First treatment, scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please confirm. Alexander stared at the message, then at the security feed showing his son still hard at work. In that moment, watching Thomas pursue his passion despite every obstacle, Alexander made a decision. He had spent years running from what he saw as limitations, but now it was time to face his own challenges with the same courage his son had shown. He typed a quick confirmation to Dr. Richards, then began composing another message, this one to his lawyer. It was time to make some changes to redirect some of his resources towards something more meaningful than just another corporate acquisition. The Harrison Adaptive Sports Center deserved proper funding and support, even if its founders didn't yet know the source of the forthcoming endowment. The news of the anonymous donation arrived on a sunny morning at the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center. Catherine sat in her office staring at the email in disbelief. The amount was staggering, enough to not only complete their current renovations, but to expand their programs, hire more staff, and ensure the center's future for years to come. "Mom!" Thomas's excited voice preceded him into the office. You see? This is incredible. We can finally build the outdoor training area we've been planning." Catherine smiled at her son's enthusiasm, but something about the donation nagged at her. The timing, the amount, the specific conditions attached to the funding, it all felt familiar somehow. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Thomas's animated planning. "We could help so many more people now," he continued, his eyes shining. "Maybe even start that scholarship program we talked about for families who can't afford specialized equipment." The past year had transformed Thomas in ways Catherine couldn't have imagined. Gone was the shy, uncertain boy who had arrived at the farm. In his place was a confident young man who had found his calling in helping others overcome their challenges. Later that afternoon, as she watched Thomas work with a new student, a teenage girl recently adapted to life in a wheelchair, Catherine noticed Jack's truck pulling up the driveway. Their relationship had grown stronger over the months, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. "Heard about the donation," he said, joining her at the observation window. "The whole town's talking about it. You've built something special here, Catherine." She turned to look at him, seeing the warmth in his eyes. "We all did," she corrected softly. "This place, it's become more than just a center. It's a community." Their moment was interrupted by Dr. Chen's arrival. The rehabilitation specialist had become an integral part of their team, her expertise helping to shape their programs and methodologies. "Catherine, Thomas," she called excitedly, "I just received confirmation. The Regional Adaptive Sports Championship Committee has accepted our bid. The center will host this year's swimming events." The news sent a wave of excitement through the building. Thomas wheeled himself over, already talking about preparation plans and training schedules. Catherine watched him take charge of the discussion, pride swelling in her heart at the natural leader he had become. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Catherine found herself alone in the barn, looking at the wall of photographs they had started. Each image told a story of triumph: children taking their first independent strokes in the pool, teenagers mastering new skills, families finding hope and community. Among the photos was one of Thomas with his first student, Sarah Martinez. The girl who had barely been able to stay afloat was now training to compete in the upcoming championship. Her progress was a testament to Thomas's patience and understanding, his ability to see potential where others saw limitations. Catherine's phone buzzed with a news alert, another article about Harrison Enterprises. She usually ignored these, but the headline caught her eye: CEO Alexander Harrison takes temporary leave for health reasons. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the brief announcement. Despite everything, a part of her still cared about what happened to him. She thought about calling, then remembered the wall of silence he had built between them, the way he had dismissed their family as a burden. "Mom?" Thomas's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He had returned to the barn carrying his training journal. "I've been thinking about the championship. I want to compete." Catherine turned to face her son, seeing the determination in his expression. "Are you sure it's a big step?" "I'm sure," he nodded. "But not just for myself. I want to show others what's possible. Every person who comes here has their own story, their own struggles. Maybe by competing, I can help them see that challenges don't define us. It's how we face them that matters." His words struck Catherine with their wisdom and maturity. She thought about the anonymous donation again, about Alexander's sudden health issues, about the way life had a way of teaching its lessons in unexpected ways. Outside, the motion activated. Lights illuminated the new sign they had installed just last week. Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, where limitations transform into possibilities. The words seemed to glow with new meaning now, a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. Catherine hugged her son, marveling at the strength he had found within himself. They had taken what was meant to be their exile and transformed it into a mission, a purpose larger than themselves. Whatever the future held, whether it included Alexander or not, they had built something meaningful, something that would leave a lasting impact on countless lives. The Regional Adaptive Sports Championship was 6 weeks away, and the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center was buzzing with activity. Thomas divided his time between his own training and coaching others, pushing himself harder than ever before. The anonymous donation had transformed their facilities into a state-of-the-art training center, attracting participants from across New England. "Your form is improving," Dr. Chen noted during one of Thomas's training sessions. "But remember to pace yourself. The championship is a marathon, not a sprint." Thomas nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the competition. He had been researching past champions, studying techniques, and developing strategies. The upcoming event wasn't just about winning. It was about proving something to himself and others. Meanwhile, in a private rehabilitation facility in Boston, Alexander Harrison gripped the edges of a therapy pool, his arms trembling with effort. The treatments had taken their toll, leaving him weaker than he'd ever felt, but also more determined. "Good, Mr. Harrison," his physical therapist encouraged. 3 more laps." As he pushed through the exercise, Alexander couldn't help but think of Thomas. How many times had his son faced similar challenges? How many times had he persevered while Alexander was too busy with his empire to notice? Back in his private room, Alexander scrolled through recent photos from the Vermont facility's social media page. The championship preparations were well underway, and he noticed Thomas's name among the registered competitors. "Sarah," he called, his assistant, who had been managing both his business and personal affairs during his treatment. "I need you to clear my schedule for the championship weekend." "Sir?" Sarah looked up from her tablet, surprised. "Are you sure you'll be strong enough?" Alexander met her concerned gaze. "I need to be there," he said simply, "even if they don't know I'm watching." At the center, Catherine was reviewing the latest financial reports when Jack knocked on her office door. Their relationship had deepened over the months, but lately, she'd sensed him holding something back. "Got a minute?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Catherine nodded, noticing the serious expression on his face. "I've been doing some research about that anonymous donation," he began carefully, "and I think I know where it came from." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. Part of her had suspected, but she hadn't wanted to acknowledge the possibility. "There's more," Jack continued. "I have a friend at Burlington General Hospital. He mentioned that Alexander Harrison has been receiving treatment there. Something serious, from what I hear." The news hit Catherine like a physical blow. Despite everything, the thought of Alexander being ill affected her more deeply than she'd expected. "Does Thomas know?" Jack asked gently. Catherine shook her head. "I haven't told him anything. He's so focused on the championship and this... She trailed off, unsure how this information would impact their son. That evening, as Catherine watched Thomas working with his students, she noticed things she hadn't before, gestures and expressions that reminded her of Alexander. The way Thomas furrowed his brow when concentrating, the determined set of his jaw, the natural leadership he exhibited. He had inherited more than just his father's name. In the pool, Thomas was helping Sarah Martinez perfect her turn technique for the competition. The girl had progressed remarkably under his guidance, and Catherine could see the pride in her son's eyes as Sarah executed a perfect flip turn. "You're ready," Thomas told her, beaming. "You're going to amazing at the championship." Sarah's parents, watching from the observation area, wiped tears from their eyes. They had told Catherine earlier how Thomas had given their daughter back her confidence, her joy in life. It was a gift beyond measure. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Catherine found Thomas still in the pool practicing his starts. "Don't overdo it," she called from the edge. "Dr. Chen said you need to rest too." Thomas floated to the side, looking up at her with an expression that made her heart ache. It was so like his father's when deep in thought. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder if Dad knows about all this, about what we've built here?" Catherine sat down at the pool's edge, letting her feet dangle in the water. "I think he might," she answered carefully. "The donation. There are things about it that feel familiar." Thomas was silent for a moment, processing this information. "I used to swim to prove something to him, he finally said, but now I'm doing it for myself and for everyone else who comes here. We're not just teaching people to swim, we're showing them they're capable of so much more than they thought possible." Catherine reached out to squeeze his shoulder, marveling at the wisdom in her son's words. They had taken what could have been a story of abandonment and turned it into one of empowerment and hope. As they closed up the center for the night, Catherine's phone buzzed with a message from the championship committee. The event was gaining national attention, and several media outlets had requested coverage permissions. Looking at the message, Catherine wondered if Alexander would see the coverage, if he would recognize the strength and resilience of the son he had left behind. More importantly, she wondered if he would understand what they had built here, not just a sports center, but a community of healing and growth. The lights of the barn reflected off the pool's surface, creating dancing patterns on the walls. In 6 weeks, these same lights would illuminate athletes from across the region, each with their own story of challenge and triumph. And somewhere out there, Alexander Harrison was fighting his own battle, perhaps finally understanding what his son had known all along, that limitations were not endpoints but starting lines for transformation. Alexander's treatment sessions had become a grueling routine, but each day he pushed himself harder, driven by a new purpose. His doctors were amazed by his progress, attributing it to his determination. But they didn't know about the photographs he kept on his phone, images of Thomas training, of the center thriving, of lives being changed. "Your numbers are improving," Dr. Richards said during a checkup, reviewing his latest test results. "The treatment is working better than expected. However," he paused, studying Alexander's face, "I'm concerned about your plans to travel to Vermont. The championship is still several weeks away, but in your condition..." "I need to be there," Alexander interrupted, his voice firm. "Even if I can only watch from a distance." After the appointment, he sat in his car, looking at a recent photo of the center. The building that had once been a simple barn now stood as a testament to possibility. The Harrison name, which he had worked so hard to associate with corporate success, now meant something entirely different in Vermont. His phone rang. It was Michael Chen, his CFO. "The board is asking questions about your return date," Michael reported. "They're concerned about the company's direction." Alexander thought about the empire he had built, the sacrifices he had made to create it. "Tell them I'm re-evaluating our priorities," he replied. "And Michael, start looking into establishing a corporate foundation, focus on adaptive sports and rehabilitation programs." At the center, Thomas was working with a new student, a young boy recently injured in an accident. The child's parents watched anxiously as Thomas helped him into the pool. "The water is like a fresh start," Thomas explained, supporting the boy as he floated. "It doesn't care about what you can't do on land. Here, we focus on what you can." Catherine observed from her office, remembering a time when Thomas had been the one needing support. Now he was the one giving strength to others, showing them a path forward through their challenges. Her computer chimed with an email notification. Another inquiry about the championship. This one was from a national magazine wanting to do a feature story on the center and its young coach. The subject line caught her attention. "From personal challenge to community triumph, the Harrison legacy redefined." The word legacy made her pause. She thought about Alexander, about his obsession with building a business empire, about how their son had taken the Harrison name and given it new meaning. The center's success wasn't measured in profit margins or stock prices, but in restored hope and renewed confidence. Jack appeared in her doorway, carrying blueprints for the newest addition to the center, an outdoor rehabilitation garden. Their relationship had grown stronger, built on shared values and mutual respect. He understood her past without judging it and supported her vision for the future. "The contractors can start next week," he said, spreading the plans on her desk. "With the donation funds, we can include all the specialized equipment we talked about." Catherine studied the plans, her finger tracing the outline of wheelchair-accessible paths and adaptive exercise stations. "It's amazing how far we've come," she mused. "When we first arrived here, this place was just an escape. Now it's so much more." "You and Thomas made it more," Jack replied softly. "You turned pain into purpose." That evening, as Catherine walked through the center after hours, she found Thomas in the office, reviewing competition videos. He looked up as she entered, his expression thoughtful. "I found something interesting," he said, turning his laptop so she could see. On the screen was an old video of Alexander giving a business speech. He's talking about overcoming barriers to success, about not letting anything hold you back. It's funny, that's exactly what we're teaching here, just in a different way. Catherine watched the video, seeing the confident businessman Alexander had been, wondering about the patient he was now. The irony wasn't lost on her, how his words about overcoming limitations had taken on new meaning through his son's work. "The championship reporter called," she told Thomas. "They want to do a feature on you, on how you've transformed this place." Thomas was quiet for a moment, wheeling himself to the window that overlooked the pool. The water reflected the evening light, creating a peaceful glow throughout the space. "If they do the story," he said finally, "I want them to focus on everyone who comes here, not just me. Every person who walks or wheels through those doors has their own story of courage. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at her son's words. The man he had become, compassionate, wise and strong, was everything she had hoped for him and more. Whatever Alexander's reasons for sending them away, whatever his current struggles, he had unknowingly given them the opportunity to build something extraordinary. As they prepared to leave for the night, Thomas paused by the wall of photos. "Mum," he said, pointing to an empty space, "I think we should leave room here. There are still more stories to tell." Looking at the blank space on the wall, Catherine thought about the stories yet to come, including perhaps one of reconciliation and understanding. But for now, they had a championship to prepare for, lives to touch, and a legacy of hope to continue building. The week before the Regional Adaptive Sports Championship brought a flurry of activity to the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center. Banners were hung, schedules finalized, and last-minute preparations completed. Television crews had begun arriving, setting up their equipment and conducting preliminary interviews with staff and participants. Thomas sat in the pool area after hours, watching the moonlight play across the water's surface. The center had never been more ready, yet he felt a strange mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Pride in what they had built, excitement for the competition, and something else, a lingering question about whether his father knew what was happening here. Thought I'd find you here, Catherine said, wheeling in a chair to sit beside him. Can't sleep? Just thinking, Thomas replied, his eyes still on the water. Remember when we first came here? How lost we felt. Catherine nodded, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. And look at us now. You've created something remarkable, Thomas. We created it, he corrected, turning to face her. You, me, Jack, Dr. Chen, everyone who comes here, it's bigger than any one person. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Chen's arrival. Despite the late hour, she often worked extended days as the championship approached. Thomas, I've been reviewing your recent training videos, she said, joining them poolside. Your technique has improved significantly, but I noticed something else, something more important. Thomas looked at her questioningly. The way you move in the water, she continued. It's not just about competition anymore. You've found your own rhythm, your own way of expressing strength. That's what makes you such an effective coach, too. The next morning brought more media attention. A national sports network had arrived to film a special segment on adaptive athletics, featuring the center as a pioneering facility in the field. What inspired you to transform this place? The reporter asked Thomas during their interview. Thomas paused, considering his answer carefully. Sometimes life takes what seems like a setback and turns it into an opportunity, he said. Everyone who comes here has faced challenges, but those challenges don't define us. They're just part of our story. As the interview continued, Catherine watched from her office, noting how naturally Thomas handled the attention. He had inherited his father's charisma, but added something uniquely his own, a genuine empathy that made everyone feel understood and valued. The day's training sessions were particularly intense. Sarah Martinez was perfecting her competition routine, her movements in the water becoming more confident with each lap. Her parents watched from the observation area, tears in their eyes as their daughter demonstrated a complex turn sequence Thomas had taught her. When Sarah first came here, her mother told Catherine, we weren't sure she'd ever find her confidence again. But Thomas, he showed her that her wheelchair doesn't define her capabilities. He showed all of us. Late that afternoon, as the center was winding down for the day, Jack arrived with unexpected news. Catherine, he said, his expression serious. I just heard from my friend at Burlington General. Alexander Harrison has been discharged. He's somewhere in the area. The information hit Catherine like a physical wave. She had suspected Alexander might come to the championship, but his presence, so close, so soon, made everything feel more immediate and real. Should we tell Thomas? Jack asked gently. Catherine watched her son through the office window as he worked with his last student of the day, demonstrating a breathing technique with patient enthusiasm. Not yet, she decided. He needs to focus on the competition. Whatever Alexander's intentions, they can wait until after the championship. That evening, as they closed up the center, Thomas wheeled himself to the wall of photographs. New images had been added recently. Students achieving their goals, families celebrating progress, moments of triumph both large and small. You know what I love most about these photos, he said to his mother. Every single one tells a story of someone choosing to move forward, to try something new, to believe in possibilities. Catherine looked at her son, marveling at his wisdom. You've taught me that too, you know. When we came here, I thought we were just hiding away, but you saw it as a chance to build something meaningful. Thomas smiled, then gestured to the empty space they had reserved on the wall. I've been thinking about that space, he said. Maybe it's not just about waiting for new stories. Maybe it's about being ready for old stories to find new endings. The wisdom in his words struck Catherine deeply. She thought about Alexander, somewhere nearby, perhaps preparing to witness what his son had built from the very circumstances he had created. As they left the center that night, the security lights illuminated their sign, Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, where limitations transform into possibilities. The words seemed to glow with new meaning, as if preparing for a chapter of their story that was yet to be written. In a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town, Alexander Harrison sat by the window, watching the Vermont sunset paint, the sky in shades of gold and purple. His laptop displayed the championship schedule, Thomas's name highlighted among the competitors. The treatments had left him weaker than he'd ever been, but determination burned in his eyes. "Sir," Sarah said, entering with his evening medication, "Dr. Richards called. He wants to remind you to pace yourself during the event. Your recovery is still delicate." Alexander nodded absently, his attention caught by a local news segment playing on the room's television. The reporter stood outside the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, interviewing participants and their families. "This place has become more than just a sports facility," a mother was saying, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's a community where our children learn that their challenges don't define their potential. Thomas Harrison and his mother have created something extraordinary here." The pride that swelled in Alexander's chest was followed by a sharp pang of regret. His son had taken the Harrison name and given it a meaning far more valuable than all his corporate success. "Sarah," he called as his assistant turned to leave, "what do you see when you look at that center?" Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. "I see redemption, Mr. Harrison. You built an empire of steel and glass, but your son, he's building something that changes lives." The next morning, Alexander requested a car to drive him past the center. From a discreet distance, he watched as families arrived, as Thomas wheeled himself between the pool and the outdoor training area, as Catherine moved through the facility with confident purpose. He noticed Jack Turner's truck in the parking lot and saw the easy familiarity between him and Catherine. The sight stirred something in Alexander's chest. Not jealousy exactly, but a recognition of what he had lost, what he had thrown away in pursuit of his ambitions. Back at the bed and breakfast, Alexander reviewed the latest reports from Harrison Enterprises. The corporate foundation he had initiated was taking shape, its mission shaped by what he had learned from watching his son's work. "The board is asking about the foundation's focus," Michael Chen's email read. "They're surprised by the emphasis on adaptive sports and rehabilitation programs." Alexander began typing his response, then stopped. How could he explain to his board that his greatest legacy might not be the towers he had built, but the lives his son was changing in a converted barn in Vermont? His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Richards. "Blood work results showing improvement. Still, take it easy at the event. No unnecessary stress." Unnecessary stress. Alexander almost laughed at the phrase. What stress could be more necessary than facing the consequences of his choices, than watching his son compete in an event that represented everything he had once dismissed as a limitation? That evening, he asked Sarah to drive him past the center. One more time. The facility was quiet now, but lights still burned in the office area. Through the windows, he could see Thomas working late, reviewing what appeared to be competition strategies with a young girl, Sarah Martinez, he remembered from the articles he'd read. The sight of his son confidently coaching others despite his own challenges made Alexander's throat tight with emotion. He thought about the day he had left them here, how he had seen only limitations and burdens. Now he saw strength, purpose, and a kind of success he had never understood before. "Sir?" Sarah's voice was gentle. "The championship starts in 2 days. Are you sure you want to attend? It will be emotional." Alexander watched as Thomas and his student finished their session, saw the pride on both their faces as they reviewed whatever progress they had made. "I need to be there," he said firmly. "Not to reclaim anything. That right is long gone. But to witness what my son has built, what he has become despite my failures. Maybe even to learn from him if I'm not too late." As they drove back to the bed and breakfast, Alexander noticed a new billboard advertising the championship. The image showed several athletes in the center's pool, with Thomas prominently featured as both competitor and coach. The tagline read, "Champions aren't defined by their limitations, but by their determination." The word struck Alexander deeply. All those years ago, he had seen his son's condition as a limitation to his own ambitions. Now Thomas had taken that very perspective and transformed it into a message of hope and empowerment for others. In his room, Alexander opened his laptop, one more time looking at the championship schedule. In less than 48 hours, he would watch his son compete, would see firsthand the community he had built, the lives he had touched. The thought filled him with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. On his bedside table lay the last photo he had of them as a family, taken just weeks before he had made his devastating decision. Looking at it now, he realized that the true limitation had never been Thomas's condition. It had been his own inability to see beyond his narrow definition of success. The day before the championship dawned bright and clear, the Vermont mountains standing majestic against a perfect blue sky. The Harrison Adaptive Sports Center was alive with activity as final preparations were made. Television crews set up their equipment, volunteers arranged seating areas, and athletes arrived for their last practice sessions. Thomas wheeled through the organized chaos, checking details and offering encouragement to nervous competitors. Despite his own butterflies about tomorrow's events, he remained focused on ensuring everyone else felt prepared and supported. "Remember," he told Sarah Martinez during her final practice session, "tomorrow isn't about winning or losing. It's about showing the world what you're capable of." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "You taught me that, Thomas. When I first came here, I thought my life was over. Now I know it was just beginning differently." In her office, Catherine managed the last-minute logistics while trying to process Jack's latest update. Alexander had been seen in town, staying at the Mountain View bed and breakfast. The knowledge that he was so close made her hands tremble slightly as she reviewed the competition schedule. "You don't have to handle this alone," Jack said softly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you have support." Catherine covered his hand with hers, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm not worried about myself," she replied. "I'm worried about Thomas. He's worked so hard to build this place, to create something meaningful. I don't want anything to disrupt that." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Dr. Chen's colleagues at Burlington General Hospital. They had come to tour the facility, impressed by the innovative programs Thomas had developed. As they watched him demonstrate adaptive swimming techniques, Catherine overheard one doctor whisper to another, "Remarkable. He's not just teaching them to swim, he's teaching them to believe in themselves again." Thomas spent extra time with each of his students, ensuring they felt ready for tomorrow's events. With Sarah Martinez, he reviewed her breathing techniques one final time. With Jason Chen, a new student who had only recently joined their program, he worked on start positions until the boy's confidence matched his enthusiasm. "You've created something extraordinary here," Dr. Chen told Thomas as they watched the students practice. "Each person who comes through those doors finds more than just physical training. They find hope." As evening approached, the media crews conducted their final pre-event interviews. Thomas handled the questions with natural grace, always, redirecting attention to the broader community rather than himself. "Tomorrow isn't just about competition," he told one reporter. "It's about celebrating human potential. Every person here has faced challenges that might have seemed insurmountable, but they've learned what I learned, that limitations are often just invitations to find new ways forward." After the interviews, Catherine found Thomas in the quiet pool area, watching the sunset paint the water in golden hues. She recognized his contemplative expression. It was one she had seen often in Alexander's face years ago. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling into a chair beside him. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his fingers trailing in the water. "I've been thinking about Dad," he admitted, "about how he saw this place as a punishment, an exile, but look what it became instead." Catherine's heart tightened, knowing Alexander was closer than Thomas realized. "Life has a way of transforming our challenges into opportunities," she said carefully. "You taught me that." "It's funny," Thomas continued. "I used to swim to prove something to him, to show him I wasn't limited by this wheelchair. But tomorrow, when I compete, it won't be about proving anything. It'll be about celebrating what we've all built here together." As they prepared to leave for the night, a delivery arrived, a huge banner for the entrance bearing the center's motto, "Where limitations transform into possibilities." Thomas stared at it for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You know what I love about that message," he said. "It doesn't deny that limitations exist, it just suggests that they're not the end of the story." Catherine watched her son, marveling at his wisdom and strength. Whatever tomorrow brought, whether Alexander revealed himself or remained in the shadows, she knew Thomas would face it with the same grace and courage he had shown throughout their journey. The security lights came on automatically as dusk deepened, illuminating the facility that had grown from a simple barn into a beacon of hope. Tomorrow, these spaces would be filled with athletes, families, and spectators, all gathering to witness what was possible when limitations were seen not as barriers, but as beginning points for transformation. In his room at the Mountain View Bed and Breakfast, Alexander Harrison stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. The morning of the championship had arrived, bringing with it a mixture of anticipation and apprehension that made his chest tight. "Your medication, sir," Sarah reminded him gently, placing the pills and a glass of water on the bedside table. "Dr. Richards was very specific about maintaining your schedule, especially today." Alexander nodded, taking the medication without argument, a change that would have surprised his old self. The past months of treatment had taught him humility, showing him that strength sometimes meant accepting help rather than refusing it. "The live stream of the event begins in 2 hours," Sarah continued, checking her tablet. "I've arranged for discreet seating in the observation area, as requested. You'll be able to see everything without being immediately visible." Looking out his window, Alexander could see the mountain road that led to the center. Cars were already heading that way, carrying families and supporters to the championship. Among them would be people whose lives had been touched by his son, lives he had never thought about when he had sent his family away. At the center, Thomas was already in the pool, doing his warm-up laps under Dr. Chen's watchful eye. The water embraced him like an old friend, each stroke a reminder of how far he had come from those first difficult days of therapy. "Looking strong," Dr. Chen called from the pool's edge. "Remember to pace yourself, you have multiple events today." Catherine watched from the observation area, her heart full of pride and nervous energy. The facility was quickly filling with spectators, media crews, and participants. The transformation from their first day here to this moment seemed almost miraculous. Jack appeared at her side, coffee in hand. "Security just reported a black town car entering the parking lot," he said quietly. "The driver matches Sarah Johnson's description, Alexander's assistant." Catherine took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He's really here then? Want me to have security keep an eye on him?" She shook her head. "No. Whatever happens today needs to happen naturally. This is Thomas's moment. Let's keep it that way." The opening ceremony was scheduled to begin in an hour. Athletes and their families gathered in the main area, where the local news crews were setting up for live coverage. Sarah Martinez sat with her parents, wearing the center's team uniform with proud confidence. "Thomas," she called as he wheeled past. "Thank you, no matter what happens today, thank you for showing me what's possible." Thomas smiled, remembering his own journey from uncertainty to confidence. "You did the hard work," he replied. "I just showed you the way to the water." In the parking lot, Alexander's town car pulled into a discreet spot near the back entrance. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the door handle, and Sarah quickly moved to assist him. "Are you sure you're strong enough for this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Alexander looked toward the building that had once been a simple barn. The building he had intended as an exile for his family, which they had transformed into a sanctuary for others. "I have to be," he replied softly. "I've missed too much already." Inside, the championship preparations continued. The pool area had been transformed with banners and decorations. The water, gleaming invitingly under the professional lighting installed for the event. Television crews made final adjustments to their equipment, while reporters practiced their opening segments. Catherine found Thomas in the quiet of his office, studying the competition schedule one last time. She noticed he had added a new photo to his desk, one of their first days at the farm when everything had seemed uncertain and difficult. "Why that photo?" she asked, touching its frame gently. "To remember," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "Not the pain or the anger, but the moment we decided to move forward, to build something new. Every person who comes here has a moment like that, when they choose to see possibilities instead of limitations. A volunteer appeared at the door. 10 minutes until the opening ceremony, Thomas. They're asking for you at the pool. As Thomas wheeled toward the door, he paused, looking back at his mother. You know what I'm most proud of, he said? Not the medals I might win today, but the fact that we took what was meant to break us and used it to help others heal. Catherine watched him go, her heart full of love and pride. Outside the office, she could hear the growing excitement as the championship prepared to begin. Somewhere in that crowd, Alexander Harrison was preparing to witness what his son had built from the ruins of his rejection. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the water in the pool and creating dancing patterns on the walls. In less than an hour, these waters would be the stage for demonstrations of courage, determination, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The championship opened with a ceremony that brought tears to many eyes. Athletes from across New England paraded around the pool, each representing their own journey of triumph over adversity. Thomas led the Harrison Centers team, their blue and silver uniforms gleaming under the lights. From his carefully chosen seat in the observation area, Alexander watched through misty eyes as his son guided his team with natural leadership and grace. Sarah sat beside him, ready to assist if his strength wavered, but her presence was almost forgotten as he focused entirely on the scene before him. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice rang out. Welcome to the Regional Adaptive Sports Championship. Today we celebrate not just athletic achievement, but the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And there's no better place for this celebration than the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, a facility that has become a beacon of hope and possibility for so many. The crowd erupted in applause, and Alexander noticed how many people turned to smile at Thomas, their faces showing genuine affection and respect. His son had built more than a training facility. He had created a community. The first events began, and Alexander found himself holding his breath as he watched various athletes compete. Each person who entered the water carried their own story of challenge and perseverance. He recognized many of them from the articles and videos he had studied during his treatment. The Martinez girl, showing incredible form in her butterfly stroke. Young Jason Chen, competing in his first ever event with determined focus. Thomas Harrison will be competing in the next heat, the announcer called, and Alexander's heart seemed to stop for a moment. Catherine, standing at the pool's edge with Dr. Chen, watched as Thomas positioned himself for the start. She knew every hour of practice, every moment of determination that had led to this point. Jack stood nearby, his steady presence providing silent support. The starting signal sounded, and Thomas entered the water with fluid grace. His movements were strong and precise, showing years of training and dedication. The crowd cheered as he took the lead, his powerful strokes carrying him through the water with remarkable speed. "Look at that technique," one of the commentators remarked. "Harrison isn't just competing, he's demonstrating mastery. And remember, folks, this is the same young man who has coached many of today's competitors, helping them find their own strength in the water." Alexander leaned forward in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests. He remembered his own words from years ago about limitations and burdens. Now he watched as his son demonstrated that limitations were simply challenges to be met with innovation and determination. Thomas touched the wall first, setting a new regional record. The crowd erupted in celebration, but instead of immediately accepting congratulations, Thomas turned to encourage the other competitors as they finished. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about his character. "That's what makes this place special," Alexander heard someone behind him say. "It's not just about winning, it's about lifting each other up." Between events, Thomas coached his students, offering last-minute advice and encouragement. Sarah Martinez was preparing for her final, her face showing a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Remember what we practiced," Thomas told her. "The water doesn't know about limitations, it only knows about possibilities." Catherine watched these interactions from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. Movement caught her eye, and she noticed Alexander shifting in his seat, clearly moved by what he was witnessing. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and in that moment, she saw something she hadn't expected, not just regret, but understanding. The championship continued, each event showcasing different aspects of human determination and spirit. The Harrison Center's team performed admirably, but more impressive than their athletic achievements was the way they supported each other, celebrated each other's successes, and helped each other through moments of doubt. "This is more than a competition," the announcer commented during a brief break. "What we're seeing here is the embodiment of the center's motto, limitations truly transforming into possibilities." Alexander watched as Thomas prepared for his final event of the day, the most challenging one. His son's face showed focus and determination, but also something else: joy. Despite everything, despite the challenges, despite Alexander's abandonment, Thomas had found his purpose and his happiness. The water in the pool rippled with anticipation as the competitors took their positions. In these moments before the final race, the facility that had once been meant as an exile had become a stage for demonstrating the very strength Alexander had failed to see: the power of embracing challenges and transforming them into opportunities for growth. The final event of the championship approached with an air of electric anticipation. Thomas positioned himself for the start, his mind clear and focused. This race wasn't just about winning, it was about demonstrating everything the center stood for, everything they had built together. In the stands, Alexander felt his strength wavering, the day's emotional intensity taking its toll. Sarah noticed his pallor and quietly offered his medication, but he waved it away, unwilling to miss a moment of what was unfolding before him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice rang out, "this is the final event of today's championship. In Lane 4, we have Thomas Harrison, founder and head coach of the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, current regional record holder." The starting signal sounded, and Thomas entered the water with perfect form. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as he moved through the water with graceful power. Each stroke seemed to tell the story of his journey, from a child facing challenges to a leader inspiring others. Catherine held her breath, watching her son compete. Jack's hand found hers, offering silent support as they witnessed Thomas's moment of triumph. Around them, his students cheered, their voices rising in unified support for the coach who had shown them their own strength. "Amazing technique," one of the commentators noted. "Harrison isn't just swimming, he's demonstrating what's possible when we redefine our limitations." The race was close, each competitor giving their all. As they approached the final lap, Thomas was neck and neck with another athlete. The crowd's cheering grew louder, the energy in the facility reaching a fever pitch. In that moment, Alexander could no longer contain himself. Rising from his seat, despite Sarah's concerned protest, he moved to the railing. "Come on, son," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Thomas touched the wall first, setting another record. The crowd erupted in celebration, but what happened next caught everyone by surprise. Instead of celebrating his own victory, Thomas immediately turned to congratulate his fellow competitors, embracing each one with genuine warmth. The ceremony that followed was a testament to the spirit of the center. Medals were awarded not just for speed and technique, but for sportsmanship and personal growth. Sarah Martinez received special recognition for Most Improved Athlete, her journey from uncertain beginner to confident competitor, moving many to tears. As Thomas accepted his medals, he was asked to say a few words. Wheeling to the microphone, he paused, looking out at the crowd that had become his extended family. "Today isn't just about winning races," he began, his voice clear and strong. "It's about celebrating what happens when we choose to see beyond our limitations. Every person here has faced challenges that might have seemed insurmountable. But in this place, in this water, we've learned that challenges are often just invitations to find new ways forward." From his position near the railing, Alexander listened to his son's words, each one striking him with the force of truth. The empire he had built seemed hollow compared to what Thomas had created here, a community of hope, strength, and mutual support. This center began as just a building, Thomas continued, but it's become something more. It's become a place where we prove that our capabilities aren't defined by our limitations, but by our determination to move forward, to help others, to create something meaningful from our challenges. The crowd's applause was deafening, but Alexander barely heard it. His focus was entirely on his son, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time, not as someone limited by circumstances, but as someone who had transformed those very circumstances into a source of strength and inspiration for others. Catherine, watching from the pool's edge, saw the moment Alexander's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he gripped the railing, his body shaking with silent sobs. In that moment, she knew he finally understood what they had built here, not just a sports center, but a testament to the human spirit's capacity for growth and transformation. The championship was drawing to a close, but its impact would ripple out far beyond this day. Television cameras captured the moments of triumph, the celebrations of personal bests, the embraces between competitors who had become friends. But they couldn't capture the most profound transformation taking place, the silent recognition of a father who had finally understood the true meaning of strength and success. As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas remained by the pool speaking with his students and their families. He hadn't noticed his father's presence yet, focused entirely on celebrating others' achievements. But the moment of truth was approaching. The moment when past and present would finally converge, when limitations and possibilities would face each other across years of absence and growth. As the championship crowd thinned, a moment of quiet descended on the Harrison Adaptive Sports Center. The television crews were packing their equipment, and families were gathering their belongings, their voices filled with excitement as they discussed the day's events. Thomas remained by the pool, his medals glinting in the late afternoon light. He was speaking with Sarah Martinez's parents, who were expressing their gratitude through tears of joy. "You didn't just teach her to swim," Mrs. Martinez said, wiping her eyes. "You taught her to believe in herself again." Alexander watched. From his position near the observation area, his heart pounding. Sarah, his assistant, stood supportively at his side, ready to help if his strength failed. But something stronger than physical weakness was keeping him rooted to the spot. The weight of years of regret and the fear of rejection. Catherine noticed him first, saw the internal struggle playing across his face. She approached quietly, Jack close behind her, ready to intervene if needed. "He's changed," she said softly, stopping a few feet from her former husband. "Not just on the outside, but in here." She touched her heart. Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "Catherine, he began, but words failed him. "I know," she replied simply. "I saw you during the competition. You finally understand, don't you?" He nodded, unable to speak. The facility around them, once meant as an exile, stood as a testament to everything he had failed to see, everything his son had achieved despite his absence. Thomas was still unaware of his father's presence, now helping Jason Chen pack up his equipment, giving last-minute advice about training techniques. His natural leadership, his easy way with people, his genuine care for others, all of it struck Alexander with the force of revelation. "The anonymous donation," Catherine said quietly. "That was you, wasn't it?" Alexander nodded again. "It was the least I could do, though now I see it was nothing compared to what you and Thomas have built here." "Dad?" The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Thomas had turned, finally noticing his father's presence. His expression was unreadable, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. The pool area fell silent. The few remaining people sensed the gravity of the moment and quietly withdrew, leaving the family to their reunion. Even Jack stepped back, though he remained within sight, his protective instinct still alert. Alexander took an unsteady step forward, then another. His illness had left him weaker than he'd like, but he forced himself to move, to close the distance he had created years ago. "Thomas," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You look different," Thomas interrupted, wheeling closer. His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was carefully neutral, assessing. I am different, Alexander replied, or maybe I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time. They were closer now, father and son, separated by just a few feet of tile and years of absence. The medals around Thomas's neck caught the light, symbolic of everything he had achieved without his father's support. I watched you today, Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger. Not just swimming, but teaching, leading, inspiring. Others. You've built something extraordinary here, son, something far more valuable than anything I've ever created. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his hands resting quietly on his wheelchair's arms. Around them, the center seemed to hold its breath, waiting. This place, Thomas finally said, gesturing to the facility around them, was supposed to be our exile, our punishment. But we turned it into something else. We found strength here, purpose. Every person who comes through those doors learns what I learned, that limitations are just the beginning of possibility. Alexander felt tears running down his face, but for once he didn't try to hide them. I was wrong, he said, the words coming from deep within his soul. So terribly wrong. I thought I knew what success meant, what strength looked like. But you've shown me what true strength is. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words, with years of pain and growth, with the possibility of either reconciliation or final separation. The water in the pool lapped gently at the edges, its sound a quiet accompaniment to this moment of truth between father and son. Thomas studied his father's face, seeing not just the physical changes wrought by illness, but something deeper, a fundamental shift in the man who had once seen him as a burden. The silence between them was heavy with years of unspoken words, of pain and growth, of lessons learned in very different ways. I heard about your health, Thomas said finally, his voice gentle. Dr. Chen mentioned you were receiving treatment. Alexander nodded, unconsciously touching his chest where the pain had become a constant companion. Life has a way of teaching us its lessons, he said softly. Sometimes through success, sometimes through illness. I just wish I hadn't been such a slow student. Catherine moved closer, standing beside Thomas. Jack remained a respectful distance away, but his presence offered silent support. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the water that danced across their faces. The anonymous donation, Thomas said, understanding dawning in his eyes. That was you. It was, Alexander admitted. Though it feels insignificant now, compared to what you've built here. Money was always my answer to everything. I'm beginning to learn there are more important currencies in life. Thomas wheeled himself to the wall of photographs, gesturing for his father to follow. Together they looked at the images. Students achieving their goals, families celebrating progress, moments of triumph both large and small. Every person on this wall has a story, Thomas explained. They came here thinking they were limited, defined by what they couldn't do. But in the water they found freedom. They discovered strength they didn't know they had. Alexander's hand trembled as he reached out to touch one of the photos, Thomas teaching Sarah Martinez her first strokes. You've become a remarkable teacher, he said softly. You see in others what I failed to see in you. It's not about forgetting the past, Thomas replied, turning to face his father. It's about choosing how to move forward. That's what we teach here every day. Catherine watched the exchange, her heart full of complex emotions. She felt Jack's presence behind her, his hand gently touching her shoulder in support. Their own relationship had grown from the ashes of her marriage, built on mutual respect and understanding. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Alexander said, his voice breaking slightly. I haven't earned that, but I'd like to learn from you, from this place you've created, if you'll let me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering his father's words. Around them, the center seemed to hold its breath, the water in, the pool lapping gently at the edges. Learning is what we do here, he said finally. Every day we learn to see beyond our limitations, to find new ways forward. Maybe, he paused, choosing his words carefully, maybe that's something we could explore together. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a possibility. Alexander nodded, understanding the gift he was being offered. Not a return to the past, but a chance to build something new. As if on cue, Sarah Martinez appeared in her wheelchair, her medal gleaming around her neck. She stopped short when she saw the group, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Thomas," she said hesitantly, "my parents wanted to know if you'll be at training tomorrow. They said I showed them today that anything is possible." Thomas smiled, his eyes meeting his father's. "That's exactly what we teach here," he said, his words carrying multiple meanings. Every day is a new opportunity to redefine what's possible. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the pool. Through the windows, they could see the center's sign illuminated against the darkening sky. Harrison Adaptive Sports Center, where limitations transform into possibilities. The words seemed to take on new meaning in that moment, not just for the students who came to learn and grow, but for a father and son taking their first tentative steps toward understanding each other. As they stood there, surrounded by the legacy of what had been built from pain and rejection, a new chapter was beginning. Not a story of instant reconciliation or easy forgiveness,